300 hours, and other parts of the world, that forms a primary, and other airlines forms a primary source of recruitment. And so I think engaging in that process, understanding the process and understanding the precautions that have to be taken to make sure that process is safe, is the right track to secure the long-term future.
So if I'm delving through that, perhaps you're saying that if you were required to have 1,500 hours, the value of pilots with that qualification would be much higher to operations, and the loss of such a pilot would be a much greater loss.
Yeah, and
I think that's inevitable.
Yeah, and I think we would consider ourselves to be a target. Certainly last year in Singapore, we had a number of our pilots attracted off to fly for Emirates or Etihad in the Middle East, because they've done 5 or 6 years with us flying A320s, which is a very nice aeroplane, but as you know, pilots, and I say this in front of a pilot, pilots...
And a former policeman, watch it.
I do get fixated on the size of the aircraft and how many engines it has and everything else.
No difference in traffic.
So we do end up being a target for the long-haul carriers who are obviously offering higher salaries and from a pilot's perspective, a bit more excitement.
Well, I think the other point, again, refers back to a question earlier on, is that our pilots are required to come into the organisation with a type rating, and that's something that they finance themselves. But we thereafter exercise no hold over them at all. So there's no they are not indebted to the company in any sense. So they are free to move on, and so I think, as Tony was suggesting, that
so you live by the sword and die by the sword, as it were.
Sorry?
You live by the sword and die by the sword in that regard.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Could I just make a matter of procedure now? Is it your intention, or would you like to give us any evidence in camera today?
I think, Chairman, we're content with the evidence we've provided.
Okay.
I think, as Senator Xenophon mentioned, if you'd like us to come back after the conclusion of the inquiry.
Before I go to Senator Nash, under the present training regime, is it possible to get in the right-hand seat of a airline jet, not ever having taxied the actual physical jet?
No.
So how do you?
Well, yeah.
I mean, so if you don't go into the second officer's seat, you go into the first officer's seat out of the simulator, and in the simulator, as you know, you can't see the end of the wing. But
I think I need to modify my answer. I think the within our airline.
No, not your airline.
I'm not qualified. I'm sorry, I'm not qualified to answer the question in relation to other. I'm not qualified.
Well, to the best of your knowledge, in the aviation world, is it possible to qualify as a first officer not ever having actually taxied the jet that you qualified? In other words, have done it all in the simulator and, whoops, I'm in the right-hand seat. Oh, gee, I didn't know the wing was that long. Whoops, took the end off it. That is possible, isn't it?
Can I suggest
I simply don't know the answer.
So hypothetical to be a question without an answer, but do you mean that in the real world does that happen? Is that your question?
Are there license approvals where you've actually not having
physically flown the aircraft, or taxi the aircraft even?
I simply don't know. I don't know the answer. In my experience, I can only talk from my experience. We didn't allow the first officer to taxi the aircraft. We didn't even give him a steering wheel. Which I always took great comfort from. But on this aeroplane, they do in Tiger they do get their own steering wheel.
Tiger's different.
I simply don't have the knowledge to answer the question.
But I think in terms of you, through your career, I mean, you can answer it from that perspective with, with the experience that you've got. You've never actually had an experience of that, have you?
No, I haven't.
So in other words, in your experience, you might have done 300 hours in the simulator, then somehow you do some hours in the actual plane, but not in the right-hand seat?
Well, I think that question would relate to a long-haul operator who might use a second officer. But certainly all the training that we do.
But look, let me just. As a qualified first officer in an airline, is it or is it not the case that when you are qualified as the first officer in the airline, sitting in the right-hand seat, you may not have ever actually physically taxied the plane because you've done all your training in a simulator?
Have a safety pilot.
You know that that's happened in other.
Well, I think in order to, I think that the question.
In other words, do they do some takeoff and landings for training in an airliner instead of the simulator?
In terms of to go back, I think we're moving on to another question now, which is the training for first officer is he gains his license, he gains his type rating on the aircraft, which is entirely conducted in the simulator, and then he goes through a process within the airline of line training. Now, it depends what you call the point of qualification as the first officer. At the point of qualification as the first officer, when he comes out of the simulator, he may be sitting in the right-hand seat of the aircraft, having never flown the aircraft before.
Okay, that's all I need to know. Senator Nash.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just ask, how many countries does Tiger operate in?
12.
12, and they are?
So we have two different businesses. So Tiger Airways Australia is